Hey guys, I'm Adnan Hassan. I am going to speak about the untapped power of small states and creating a new asset class and a global bank for small states. I live on a small island in the Caribbean. I run Mindful Enterprises. I served on the board of directors of the World Bank. I did some interesting things in Silicon Valley. I built one of the first electronic markets on the internet in '94. And I wrote a book on sovereign funds. So I have a little bit of experience about the subject that I'm talking about. As we look at the world of global disorder, the main points that I want to leave you with is to be innovative, imaginative, and show initiative. Because this new disorder, if you don't do that, you're going to be left out. So be proactive. So I live on this small island in the Caribbean called Bonaire, which is in the southern Caribbean, about 23,000 people, no traffic lights, nice winds, beautiful sunsets. And that's my office. And I'm away from the troubles of the messy world that we're all in. However, when I look outside, this is what I see. I see a world of complete disorder. I see big power rivalries. There's a Cold War 2.0 that's underway. You can see that as a hot war in Europe. And there are rising tensions in the Pacific. There's chaos, inflation, recession, supply chain disruptions, cyber threats, and frankly, a planetary crisis. Pandemics, climate, refugee, poverty. There's an African proverb that when elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. So, who lives in the global grass? When elephants fight, what happens to the rest of the world? What choices must they make? What are the investment opportunities and political risks that the rest of the world faces? So, who lives in the global grass? Small states. Small states live in the global grass. What is a small state? By the UN definition, a small state is a country with a population of 10 million or less. So that's the definition of a small state. And there's actually a UN forum for small states. Now, there are about 93, about 200 member states of the General Assembly. How many of them are small states? And just give a number in your own mind. 50, 80, 100, just lock a number. 142 of the 193 member states of the General Assembly are small states. 75% of the General Assembly is small states. So the majority of the world lives in small states. They're located globally. They're in the Caribbean, Europe, Asia Pacific, Mediterranean, else. Of the small states, 122 million live in Europe in 34 countries, 75 million live in the Pacific Asia in 34 countries, in the Gulf, 64 million live in 19 countries, in Africa, 59 million live in 20 countries, and in the Caribbean, 54 million live in 35 countries. So basically 373 million people live in 142 small states. That's what's happening in the grass. In terms of breakup of population, 5 to 10 million populations size is 33 countries. 38 countries have 1 to 5 million, and 71 countries have populations less than 1 million. So, now here's the other interesting data point I want you to think about, and I give you the number, but I want you to come up with it also. Of the 20 richest countries in the world by per capita income, the richest in the world, how many are small states? Think about that for a second. Per capita income, richest countries in the world, there are 193 countries in the world, how many of them, of the top 20, richest 20, are small states? 5, 10, 12, 14? Think of a number. I'll give you another second, just lock up a number. 17 out of the 20 richest per capita countries in the world are small states. What? 85% of the per capita income richest countries in the world are small states. 75% of the General Assembly is small states. This is what's happening in the grass on which the elephants are dancing. Small states by region. In Europe, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Switzerland, Norway, Ireland, Mediterranean, Monaco, Qatar, Israel, UAE, Kuwait, Mediterranean Gulf. Caribbean, Latin America, Bermuda, Cayman, British Virgin Islands, Bahamas, Puerto Rico. Pacific Asia, Macau, Singapore, Hong Kong, New Zealand, New Caledonia. Africa, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Botswana, Namibia, and Swaziland. So, how did small states become wealthy when they don't have domestic markets? They don't have domestic markets. They get wealthy by tapping into global markets. They're accessing the domestic markets of others. They leverage globalization. That's how small states become rich. Before we go to this, I just want to say one other thing. Guess who has the biggest stake in the success of globalization? And who's most concerned about the potential breakdown of globalization or the decoupling or the supply chain breakdowns? When you're a small state, when you say, and the kingdom says that we want 65% of our supply to be domesticated. Well, when you're a small state, how do you do that? You can't do that when you're a small state. You depend on globalization and the global supply chain. But small states have some interesting features. 100% of the world's oceans and their riches are bordered by small states. Innovation, imagination, and initiative explain the success of small states. You can't afford not to be creative and moving quickly because you will lose out. Globalization is especially existential to small states. Finance, climate, trade, technology, disease are all critical issues. And small states are the canaries in the mine for the well-being of the planet. They are relatively efficient. Why? Because in general, if you lift the lid off a small state, no matter where, in the Caribbean, in Africa, in the Gulf, in Asia, Europe, you lift the lid up, you look inside, what do you find? You find similar characteristics. And what's the characteristics? Family offices. In general, 3, 5, 8, 10 families have about 60, 70% of the economic weight inside a small state. The relatively efficient coordination between markets, politics, and regulations happen in well-functioning small states. As I said, 45 families significantly influence the shape and economic future of small states. And when done well, efficiency and nimbleness is a huge advantage and, of course, avoids the side effects of state capture. This is what makes small states successful. But small states are diverse, people say. They're heterogeneous and distributed around the world. What do they have in common? What's common between the Caribbean and Asia and Gulf and Europe, small states? Can they really be pulled into a single asset class with all these differences among them? Well, let's go back to 1981. In 1981, the World Bank's private sector arm, the IFC, looked at the issues around the world and noticed that most of the global capital was staying in the US, Europe, and Japan. And they asked this question, how do we get global investors to put capital into third world countries? So they actually came up with a third world equity fund. This is 1981, essentially a rest of the world fund. They went up to New York and they had some conversations. People said, what a great idea. However, you got to change the nomenclature because nobody wants to put money into third world countries. That's not where the returns are. So they actually coined the phrase. In 1981, a friend of mine, Antoine Van Akmael, came up with the phrase emerging markets. They set up the emerging markets database, and today emerging markets are a $32.5 trillion asset class. So an entire industry was spawned from this initiative by the IFC in 1981. So we have some precedents about the creation of asset classes. So what we are planning to do is establish a small states asset class. And this basically will allow, like it did with the emerging markets asset class, pension funds, private equity funds, and sovereign funds to allocate and benchmark performance to this asset class. We tap into the collective opportunities of the institutions, municipalities, and family offices in small states. And in particular, we end up promoting, remember, 85% of the richest per capita income countries are small states, so there's a lot of liquidity inside small states. So we also do horizontal movement between this ecosystem of 375 million, 142 small states. And the geographic diversification, in fact, gives us an additional value, which is it allows us to create an uncorrelated portfolio, and we can also move risk across different regions. The Global Bank for Small States is planned as a private-public partnership, a merchant bank focused on small state clients, customer base of institutions, municipalities, and family offices. De-risking and de-levering issues that are being faced by some of the small states is something that we're going to end up addressing. I already mentioned the diversification of portfolio. We'll be doing project finance, credit, asset management, private banking services through this institution. And then we are putting it on top of a fintech platform, in particular using the decentralized ledger and some of the innovations that are happening on blockchain. And we're basically going to incorporate that into our design strategy. So, and it's basically commercially driven, but with social impact. So, we are also, if you take 142 small states, and you take the 4 or 5 families per state, and you get them together in one place, guess what you have? You got the Davos for small states. And that's in Bonaire in 2024, we're going to be hosting the initial version of the Davos for small states. So, the Prime Minister of Singapore earlier this year at the UN said, small states are by no means without agency. What we lack in size, we can make up through agility, resourcefulness, and cooperation. Go back to my original message, which is when global disorder is happening, you've got to take initiative. Don't be an observer or a victim of global disorder. When the elephants are colliding, if you're just going to be observing it, at some point they're going to trample on you in the grass. If EM, emerging markets, became a $32.5 trillion asset class, what will be the size of the small state asset class? Remember again, 85% of the per capita income richest countries in the world are small states. So innovation, imagination, initiative, the message is to be proactive, and that's my message. There's an untapped power of small states, a new asset class, a global bank for small states, and with that, thank you very, very much.